Section 4 of The Woman of the Wood by Abraham Merritt. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Ben Tucker. Part 4. Slowly, and ever more slowly, he went as he neared it. He had failed. He was a messenger bearing a warrant of death. The birches were motionless. Their leaves hung listlessly. It was as though they knew he had failed. He paused at the edge of the coppice. He looked at his watch, noted with faint surprise that already it was high noon. Short shrift enough had the little wood. The work of destruction would not be long delayed. McKay squared his shoulders and passed in between the trees. It was strangely silent in the coppice, and it was mournful. He had a sense of life brooding around him, withdrawn into itself, sorrowing. He passed through the silent, mournful wood until he reached the spot where the rounded, gleaming, barked tree stood close to the fir that held the withering birch. Still there was no sound, no movement. He laid his hands upon the cool bark of the rounded tree. "Let me see again," he whispered. "Let me hear. Speak to me." There was no answer. Again and again he called. The coppice was silent. He wandered through it, whispering, calling. The slim birches stood, passive, with limbs and leaves adroop like listless arms and hands of captive maids awaiting in dull, woe the will of conquerors. The firs seemed to crouch like hopeless men with heads and hands. His heart ached to the woe that filled the little wood, this hopeless submission of the trees. When, he wondered, would polio strike? He looked at his watch again. An hour had gone by. How long would polio wait? He dropped to the moss, back against a smooth bole. And suddenly it seemed to McKay that he was a madman, as mad as polio and his sons. Calmly he went over the old peasants and dikemen of the forest, recalled the face and eyes filled with fanatic hate. They were all mad. After all, the trees were only trees. Polio and his sons, so he reasoned, had transferred to them the bitter hatred their forefathers had felt for those old lords who had enslaved them, had laid upon them, too, all the bitterness of their own struggle to exist in this high forest land. When they struck at the trees, it was the ghosts of those forefathers striking at the nobles who had oppressed them. It was themselves striking against their own destiny. The trees were but symbols. It was the warped minds of polio and his sons that clothed them in false semblance of conscious life, blindly striving to wreak vengeance against the ancient masters and the destiny that had made their lives one hard and unceasing battle against nature. The nobles were long dead. Destiny can be brought to grips by no man, but the trees were here and alive, clothed in mirage. Through them the driving lust for vengeance could be sated. So much for polio and his sons. And he, McKay, was it not his own deep love and sympathy for the trees that similarly had clothed them in that false semblance of conscious life? Had he not built his own mirage? The trees did not really mourn, could not suffer, could not... No, it was his own sorrow that he had transferred to them, only his own sorrow, that he felt echoing back to him from them. The trees were only trees. Instantly upon the heels of that thought, as though it were an answer, he was aware that the trunk against which he leaned was trembling, that the whole coppice was trembling, that all the little leaves were shaking tremulously. McKay, bewildered, leaped to his feet. Reason told him that it was the wind, yet there was no wind. And as he stood there, a sighing arose as though a mournful breeze were blowing through the trees. And again there was no wind. Louder grew the sighing, and within it now, faint wailings. They come, farewell, sisters, sisters, farewell. Clearly he heard the mournful whispers. McKay began to run through the trees to the trail that led out to the fields of the old lodge. And as he ran, the wood darkened as though clear shadows gathered in it, as though vast unseen wings hovered over it. The trembling of the coppice increased. Bough touched bough, clung to each other, and louder became the sorrowful crying, "Farewell, sister, sister, farewell!" McKay burst out into the open. Halfway between him and the lodge were Paulo and his sons. They saw him. They pointed and lifted mockingly to him their bright axes. He crouched, waiting for them to come close. All fine-spun theories gone, and rising within him that same rage which hours before had sent him out to slay. So crouching, he heard from the forested hills a roaring clamor. From every quarter it came, wrathful, menacing, like the voices of legions of great trees bellowing through the horns of tempest. The clamor maddened McKay, fanned the flame of rage to white heat. If the three men heard it, they gave no sign. They came on steadily, jeering at him, waving their blades. He ran to meet them. "Go back!" he shouted. "Go back, Paulo! I warn you!"
"He warns us," jeered Paulo. Pierre, Jean, he warns us."
The old peasant's arm shot out, and his hand caught McKay's shoulder with a grip that pinched to the bone. The arm flexed and hurled him against the unmaimed son. The son caught him, twisted him about, and whirled him headlong a dozen yards, crashing through the brush at the skirt of the wood. McKay sprang to his feet, howling like a wolf. The clamor of the forest had grown stronger.
"Cal!" it roared. "Cal!"
The unmaimed son had raised his axe. He brought it down upon the trunk of a birch, half splitting it with one blow. McKay heard a wail go up from the little wood. Before the axe could be withdrawn, he had crashed a fist in the axe-wielder's face. The head of Paulo's son rocked back. He yelped, and before McKay could strike again, had wrapped strong arms around him, crushing breath from him. McKay relaxed, went limp, and the son loosened his grip. Instantly, McKay slipped out of it and struck again, springing aside to avoid the rib-breaking clasp. Paulo's son was quicker than he. The long arm caught him. But as the arms tightened, there was the sound of sharp splintering, and the birch into which the axe had bitten toppled. It struck the ground directly behind the wrestling men. Its branches seemed to reach out and clutch at the feet of Paulo's son. He tripped and fell backward. McKay upon him. The shock of the fall broke his grip, and again McKay writhed free. Again he was upon his feet, and again Paulo's strong son, quick as he, faced him. Twice McKay's blows found their mark beneath his heart, before once more the long arms trapped him. But the grip was weaker. McKay felt that now their strength was equal. Round and round they rocked, McKay straining to break away. They fell, and over they rolled, and over, arms and legs locked, each striving to free a hand to grip the other's throat. Around them ran Paulo and the one-eyed son, shouting encouragement to Pierre, yet neither daring to strike at McKay lest the blow miss and be taken by the other. And all that time McKay heard the little wood shouting. Gone from it now was all mournfulness, all passive resignation. The wood was alive and raging. He saw the trees shake and bend as though torn by a tempest. Dimly he realized that the others could hear none of this, see none of it, as dimly wondered why this should be.
"Kill!"
shouted the coppice, and ever over its tumult he was aware of the roar of the great forest.
"Kill! Kill!"
He saw two shadowy shapes of swarthy, green-clad men that pressed close to him as he rolled and fought.
"Kill!" they whispered. "Let his blood flow! Kill!"
He tore a wrist free. Instantly he felt within his hand the hilt of a knife.
"Kill!"
whispered the shadowy men.
"Kill!"
shrieked the coppice.
"Kill!"
roared the forest. McKay's free arm swept up and plunged the knife into the throat of Paulo's son. He heard a choking sob, heard Paulo shriek, felt the hot blood spurt in face and over hand, smelt its salt and faintly acrid odor. The encircling arms dropped from him. He reeled to his feet. As though the blood had been a bridge, the shadowy men leaped into materiality. One threw himself upon the man McKay had stabbed. The other hurled upon old Paulo. The maimed son turned and fled, howling with terror. A white woman sprang out from the shadow, threw herself at his feet, clutched them, and brought him down. Another woman and another dropped upon him. The note of his shrieking changed from fear to agony, then died abruptly into silence. And now McKay could see none of the trees, neither old Paulo nor his sons, for green-clad men and white women covered them. He stood stupidly, staring at his red hands. The roar of the forest had changed to a deep, triumphal chanting. The coppice was mad with joy. The trees had become thin phantoms etched in emerald translucent air, as they had been when first the green sorcery had meshed him. And all around him wove and danced the slim, gleaming women of the wood. They ringed him, their song, bird-sweet and shrill, jubilant. Beyond them he saw gliding toward him the woman of the misty pillar whose kisses had poured the sweet green fire into his veins. Her arms were outstretched to him. Her strange white eyes were rapt on his. Her white body gleamed with the moon radiance. Her red lips were parted and smiling, a scarlet chalice filled with the promise of undreamed ecstasies. The dancing circle, chanting, broke to let her through. Abruptly, a horror filled Mackay. Not of this fair woman, not of her jubilant sisters, but of himself. He had killed, and the wound the war had left in his soul, the wound he thought had healed, had opened. He rushed through the broken circle, thrust the shining woman aside with his blood-stained hands, and ran, weeping, toward the lake shore. The singing ceased. He heard little cries, tender, appealing little cries of pity, soft voices calling on him to stop, to return. Behind him was the sound of little racing feet, light as the fall of leaves upon the moss. Mackay ran on. The coppice lightened. The beach was before him. He heard the fair woman call him, felt the touch of her hand upon his shoulder. He did not heed her. He ran across the narrow strip of beach, thrust his boat out into the water, and wading through the shallows threw himself into it. He lay there for a moment, sobbing, then drew himself up and caught at the oars. He looked back at the shore now a score of feet away. At the edge of the coppice stood the woman, staring at him with pitying, wise eyes. Behind her clustered the white faces of her sisters, the swarthy faces of the green-clad men. "Come back," the woman whispered, and held out to him slender arms. Mackay hesitated, his horror lessening in that clear, wise gaze. He half swung the boat around, but his eyes fell again upon his blood-stained hands, and again the hysteria gripped him. One thought only was in his mind now: to get far away from where Paulo's son lay with his throat ripped open, to put the lake between him and that haunted shore. He dipped his oars deep, flung the boat forward. Once more the woman called to him, and once again. He paid no heed. She threw out her arms in a gesture of passionate farewell. Then a mist dropped like a swift curtain between him and her and all the folk of the little wood. Mackay rowed on, desperately. After a while he slipped oars, and, leaning over the boat's side, he washed away the red on his hands and arms. His coat was torn and blood-stained, his shirt too. The latter he took off, wrapped it around the stone that was the boat's rude anchor, and dropped it into the depths. His coat he dipped into the water, rubbing at the accusing marks. When he had lightened them all he could, he took up his oars. His panic had gone from him. Upon its ebb came a rising tide of regret. Clear before his eyes arose the vision of the shining woman, beckoning him, calling him. He swung the boat around to return. And instantly as he did so, the mists between him and the farther shore thickened. Around him they lightened as though they had withdrawn to make of themselves a barrier to him. And something deep within him whispered that it was too late. He saw that he was close to the landing of the little inn. There was no one about, and none saw him as he fastened the skiff and slipped to his room. He locked the door, started to undress. Suddenly sleep swept over him like a wave, drew him helplessly down into ocean depths of sleep. End of part 4.